people have unique opinions on what the New Jersey Devils should do this offseason. Some people say swing for the fences. Some people say play it a little safe. And there's one asset that I think a lot of people are forgetting that the Devils have in their possession that could be used in a few trade scenarios. What is it, and how should the Devils approach the offseason? We have a lot to break down in today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Elliott scores! Oh, Steven stepped up, nailed it. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils writer for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. In today's episode, we're going to talk about trade scenarios, and not in the way you're thinking of, because I think the Devils possess an important asset that a lot of people are forgetting. What is that asset? Well, I think we've reached a point of the offseason where the draft is now relevant for the Devils, because last season it was more or less an afterthought. Around that time, they made the big move by acquiring Tyler Toffoli from the Calgary Flames. They did not have a first-round draft pick due to the Timo Meier trade, but obviously this season did not go according to plan, and now the Devils are looking ahead to the draft lottery. The date has been announced, and we're going to look at their odds and my thoughts on the matter going forward. That's going to be the main talking point in segment one. Then in segment two, we're going to revisit my discussion from yesterday's episode, because a lot of you were talking to me on my social media platform, which I enjoy, about the Brady Kane trade, because a lot of people were conflicted. Should the Devils make a move for Brady Kane, or let's look at it from a different perspective? Should they be willing to part ways with some of their more important assets? I'll share my thoughts on the matter in that segment. And then in segment three, we're going to talk about wants and needs for the Devils. What do they actually need to improve the roster? Because like I said a few weeks ago, I don't think this Devils team is as bad as people are portraying them to be. But first, let's talk about the draft lottery. The lottery will be held on Tuesday, May 7th at NHL Network's Secaucus, New Jersey studio. The event will be broadcast on ESPN, Sportsnet, and TVA Sports. And the time has not been announced yet. It will be announced next week. And before we look at the Devils' odds, let's look at the teams that are ahead of them. The team with the best odds of landing the first overall pick are the San Jose Sharks with 18.5%, followed by the Chicago Blackhawks at 13.5%, Anaheim Ducks 11.5%, Columbus Blue Jackets 9.5%, Montreal Canadiens 8.5%, the unnamed team in Utah 7.5%, Ottawa Senators 6.5%, Seattle Kraken 6%, Calgary Flames 5%, and the Devils have a 3.5% chance in the draft lottery of getting the first overall pick. Right now, they are projected to get the 10th overall pick. That could go higher, that could go lower. Fingers crossed, it's a few positions higher. I'm not anticipating for the Devils to get the first overall pick. I mean, it would be great if they did. Looking at those chances for the Devils, obviously it could go either way. But here's the thing. I said it a few minutes ago, which is that is a very underrated asset that the Devils have, and they could use that as trade capital. So when I'm looking on social media, or when I'm looking at recent articles and I'm seeing that a lot of people aren't factoring that the Devils have a first round pick, not to mention it could be a top 10 pick, it kind of baffles me, because we're having this discussion as to what do the Devils need to improve their roster come next year. They need a goalie, they need a defenseman, do they need another forward? It's basically a hot topic issue amongst the Devils discourse, and a lot of people aren't considering the fact that the Devils have a draft pick that could be highly sought after. Here are my thoughts on how the Devils should approach this. I know a lot of people have strong emotions on the draft, and it's fun to see the future NHL stars of tomorrow. But if the Devils are serious about getting back to the playoffs, in my opinion, they should trade away that pick to get someone good. Because I was willing for the Devils to trade away the second overall pick a couple years ago. Remember, that second overall pick ended up becoming Shimon Nemec. And I was open to dealing that away for the right price because who was available for the Devils to pick up? Kevin Fiala was available. Alex DeBrincat was available. Matthew Tkachuk was available. A couple summers ago, Ryan Novozinski of NJ.com appeared on this show, and he told me that there was a lot of tire kicking in regards to the Devils potentially trading away the second overall pick. We don't know how close Tom Fitzgerald was to actually making that come into fruition, but he was taking calls. It goes to show you that at least Fitzgerald was an open book about potentially using that second overall pick in a hypothetical scenario. I think since the Devils have a good structure in place, they have some foundational pieces set for a long period of time in Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier. I think they should really consider giving away that pick if they really want to improve their roster. But here's the main question. Who would you trade for that pick? Would you trade for a goalie like Jacob Markstrom? Would you trade for a defenseman? I don't know who would be available for the Devils to pick up because throughout the course of the season, we talked about Nikita Zadorov. We talked about Noah Hanifin. Obviously, they were dealt away to different teams. Zadorov went to the Canucks. Hanifin went to the Golden Knights. I'm sure there's a few other defensemen available for the Devils to pick up, but is it worth trading away your anticipated top 10 pick in this year's draft? That's the $1 million question. And I think if the price is right, go for it. But I do express caution when trading away that pick. I do want the Devils to trade it away. Don't get me wrong, but be very smart about it because trades, as I always say, are an investment. If you recall, over 10 years ago, if you could believe it, the Devils had the 9th overall pick and they traded away to the Vancouver Canucks for who? Corey Schneider. And who did that 9th overall pick become? Bo Horvat, who became captain of the Canucks years later. That's my thing, which is it worked out well for the Canucks because they got Bo Horvat. That was their captain. They traded him away to the Islanders and they get some assets in return. Whereas the tenure for Corey Schneider, it started off really well. But towards the end, it crashed and burned to the point where the Devils parted ways with Corey Schneider for essentially nothing. So if you're serious about getting Jacob Markstrom or another top-notch goalie, you could play with the fact that you have that draft pick, but be very cautious about it because that is something that could come back to bite you. Case in point, we saw it with Corey Schneider. That's my thing, which is I do want the Devils to trade it away, but they got to be very smart about it. And they got to know this is an investment that is a big risk, but are you serious about getting back to the playoffs? And are you serious about becoming legitimate title contenders? Because I think if the Devils tighten up their defense, and I think if they get a solid goalie in front of Jake Allen, I think they can definitely make a legitimate run, but they definitely got to add more physicality to their blue line, and they got to get a consistent goalie because that certainly can go a long way. Let me know what you guys think. What do you want the Devils to do with that draft pick? If they hold on to it, great. If they trade it away, open to that too. But I think if the Devils really want to get back to the playoffs, consider trading it away because that's huge draft capital for the Devils. And I think a lot of teams would be interested in that pick. Okay, we're going to shift over from the draft to players that are already established on the Devils roster momentarily. But before we continue, let me tell you about Indeed. You need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills when you can do it all with Indeed. Find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching, assessments, and virtual interviews. Candidates you apply through Instant Match are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who only see it in search, according to U.S. Indeed data. I've actually used Indeed before to book myself some play-by-play jobs. Love it, and I'm still associated with the company that I found those play-by-play jobs through Indeed. Indeed knows you're growing your own business. You have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applicants that match your must-have job requirements. Visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application. Pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Okay, let's revisit my topic from yesterday, which is the possibility of the Devils being interested in Brady Kachuk. I want to make something perfectly clear. Brady Kachuk is a phenomenal player. He's in his mid-20s. He kind of fits that window of age for the Devils because right now the Devils are a young team. They're trying to find their footing in the NHL. You got players like Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Jack Hughes, Timo Meier. They have their careers ahead of them. You got players that are a little up there in age like Dougie Hamilton, but is still very vital to this roster. And adding Brady Kachuk, I would love that. But my problem is, and I said this in the previous episode, what would the asking price be? Because I don't think the Ottawa Senators are going to be jumping the gun to trade away their young captain, especially since he's entering year 4 of his 7-year deal. But the point I'm trying to make in this segment is, who would I be willing to trade away? Because this topic was discussed on social media because some people were split in the middle, which is, hey, I'm willing to trade for Brady Kachuk if Nemetz is included in the deal, or if it's a 1-for-1 for Hischier, I'm okay with it. Maybe the Devils should consider trading away Jesper Bratt and Nico Hischier for Brady Kachuk just because Brady Kachuk brings a lot of physicality, and that can definitely shapeshift the Devils in more ways than one. I saw all the discussions on social media, and quite honestly, I enjoy it. I love hearing different perspectives from various amount of people because everyone has a unique point of view. But here's my point of view of the whole matter, which is the main issue for the Devils is not their offense. When you have someone like Nico Hischier, he's a phenomenal two-way player. Nico Hischier is also great in the face-off department, and Nick Villano brought this up in his article discussing scenarios for Brady Kachuk, which is ever since Michael McLeod went down with this scandal, we know what happened, but the one thing that McLeod brought to the roster in terms of a hockey standpoint was that he was phenomenal in the face-off department, and had he finished the rest of the season with the Devils, most likely he would have finished atop of the NHL in the face-off department. In fact, he already did, but the numbers would be even higher. But Nico Hischier is phenomenal in the face-off department, and he's a center. Brady Kachuk, while he does do face-offs, he's a winger. And I think that kind of hurts the depth at center for the Devils. And it's just a matter of like, what do the Devils need and what do they want? And we'll talk more about that in the third segment. But focusing on players that are already added on to the roster, obviously a lot of people have their own perspectives, which is they're willing to part ways with this player, that player, this sort of player. My thing is, like, I don't think it's necessary for the Devils to trade away Nico Hischier, Timo Meier, Jack Hughes, or Jesper Bratt, because all 4 of those players are phenomenal, and they're not really the issue as to why the Devils struggled this season. I just said what Nico Hischier brings to the roster. Obviously, he's the captain of this team, and I think he's done a pretty good job of leading the Devils. Jack Hughes, he's a future superstar in this league. I genuinely do believe if he stays healthy, he can be a future MVP caliber player, and I think he has a good chance of getting his name in the same sentence as Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, Sidney Crosby, Alexander Ovechkin, legends of the game, as long as he could stay healthy. And that's the biggest what if for Jack Hughes, which is if he is able to stay healthy and play a full 82-game season, who knows what his numbers could be like. A couple seasons ago, we've already seen him fall short of the 100-point marker because he just missed a few games. Had he suited up in those games, he would have gotten it easily in my books. But it doesn't change the fact that Jack Hughes is phenomenal. Jesper Bratt has shown that he is a very consistent player. And he was an all-star this season, albeit he was used as a replacement. But the fact that he was still given that all-star title, it goes to show you how far Jesper Bratt has come. And I still think he's one of the more underrated players in the NHL. Timo Meier, if he's put in the right system and given the right chance, he's going to thrive. But the thing I'm just trying to say is that when you look at all those players, do you ever think to yourself and say, they're the problem. They're the reason why the Devils are losing. No, they're not. So trading one of those players for Brady Kachuk, it just doesn't make sense in my book. Not because Brady Kachuk is bad, but Brady Kachuk, he does add physicality. I cannot take that away from him. He's an aggressive player, great on the forecheck, not afraid to get in opponent's grill, not afraid to throw his body around. He definitely brings that sort of physicality, and he can back it up by getting point after point after point. That kid is phenomenal. You love him or hate him, he's an amazing hockey player. But the thing is like, let's say the Devils trade away Jesper Bratt for Brady Kachuk. Other than the physicality, what really changes in the grand scheme of things? You can find physicality elsewhere at a cheaper penny. In fact, the Devils have already done that by getting Curtis Lazar and Curtis McDermott. I think both of those players have shown that they're very physical and they're not afraid to do the dirty work. Eric Haula, same to an extent. Eric Haula is one of the reasons why Jack Hughes was able to thrive a couple seasons ago, because Eric Haula does that dirty work. He does the faceoffs, and Jack Hughes can focus on Jack Hughes. My thing is like, yes, the Devils do need more physicality. They need more toughness. They need more grit. But I think you can find that at a much cheaper clip, because similar to what I said in the previous episode, Brady Kachuk, if he is available by the Senators, which I don't believe is true, I think Mike Rupp was just throwing crap out there, it's going to come very, very, very expensive. And I need you to answer yourself this. Is gutting the team, let's say you have to trade away two important assets, is that worth it for the Devils, especially since they missed the playoffs by not that much in a weak Eastern Conference? Let's just be real. That's my thing. So when looking at what the Devils need and what they want, I think Brady Kachuk is more of a want than a need. But that's just my 2-cent opinion. But I do want to give you guys some hope. I do believe that a trade is inevitable for the Devils, and similar to what Mike Rupp said on NHL Network, I do anticipate for the Devils to shake something up a little bit, but they don't need to cause an earthquake. I think what they just need to do is improve some other intangibles to the roster, and they're going to be much better. And what do they need to do? Well, we'll talk about that momentarily, but before we continue, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. We've all been there before, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. Boy, do my Los Angeles Lakers know a thing or two about that. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out the win. That's when you dig deep, lift your head up, and say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much money from my friends as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and biggest empire. It's a Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime, with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. Play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, charge other players rent for your iconic properties. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Okay, in this episode, I gave you a tale of two cities. On the one hand, I told you what the Devils can do trade-wise with their draft pick. On the other side of that, I told you what they should not do with players already on the roster. But I'm sure the main question that a lot of you have, and I talked about it to close out the second segment, is what do the Devils need to do, and why is a trade inevitable at this point? Well, let me give you my thoughts on the matter. The reason why I think a trade is inevitable for the Devils is because Tom Fitzgerald now realizes his mistake from last offseason, because last offseason, the Devils got Tyler Toffoli, which is a big-name player, and I still think that Tyler Toffoli did a good job with the Devils. What he lacked in speed and dynamic playing ability, he made up for with technique and knowledge of the game. I say he was a pretty decent fit with the Devils, obviously to each their own, but he's no longer on the roster, and Yegor Sharangovich is thriving out in Calgary. All that glitters is not gold. The Devils don't need to go for the big-name player to make their roster better in terms of fours. Now, on defense and goaltending, that's a different story. because I think it's not just a pick one or the other. I think it's a two-way street. The Devils need to get more physicality on their blue line, and they need to get a better goaltending tandem, because the current tandem of Allen and Kakkonen, it's all right, but it's not going to get you far in the playoffs. But I think Jake Allen has solidified the backup role, and I think Kakkonen, he'll find ventures elsewhere. But the Devils do need to get a better goalie in front of Jake Allen. I'm not saying they need to get a Vezina caliber player, because last year it seemed like the Devils were linked to Connor Hellebuck. It seemed like he was open to being dealt away to New Jersey, but obviously there were more intangibles to it because he was projected to make a lot of money. I was stunned when he signed an extension with the Winnipeg Jets. But digressing a little bit, the Devils do need to get better goaltending, and they need to get better defense. Particularly, they just need to get more depth defensively, because I think that was one of their biggest Achilles heels, especially when they were dealing with some injuries on their blue line, particularly with Dougie Hamilton, who missed 75% of the season, or when Yoda Siegenthaler was dealing with his lingering injuries here or there. It seemed like the Devils were just struggling to fill in those voids, and Nemitz and Hughes sometimes just looked absolute gassed out there, and you couldn't make them a scratch, because it's like, who do you replace? You really can't. That's my thing. And I think Nemitz was a healthy scratch one time when Travis Green took over, but still, it's just like, I think he would have benefited with taking just a couple nights off. Same with Luke Hughes. But the offseason is going to be pivotal for the Devils, because I think this team still has potential to be a playoff caliber unit. And similar to what Tom Fitzgerald said, I don't believe the season from 2022, 2023, I don't think it was a fluke. I think this team can really go places. And the biggest question mark we're going to have when reflecting on this past season is like, where could the Devils have gone if they were fully healthy? Because we saw Jack Hughes and Timo Meier, they elected to get surgery towards the end of the year. And Nico Hischier, he missed extended time. I just mentioned Dougie Hamilton. He missed 75% of the season. Vitek Vanecek, a lot of people are forgetting he was injured prior to being dealt away. I don't know what his injury was, but he was dealing with something, and a lot of other players were dealing with things here and there. Curtis Lazar didn't even finish the season because he sustained an injury as well. That's my thing, which is the Devils aren't as bad as you're projecting them to be. The biggest thing is that they just were never healthy, and they could never establish that chemistry. And I'm just trying to give you guys that sort of positive outlook. So when looking at like some of these big name trades, I just ask you to sit back and reflect. Is this a need or is this a want? Someone like Timo Meier, he was a need. Devils needed a little more physicality. We saw what he did in round one against the Rangers. He got underneath a lot of players' skin, including Igor Shesterkin, who was kind of off his game in last year's playoffs. And Timo also adds more scoring options, and we saw how he did to close out the second half of this season. Curtis Lazar, same way. Devils needed more sandpaper type action, and Tom Fitzgerald said that getting a player of that caliber was definitely a priority before the trade deadline concluded. Tyler Toffoli, was he a need or was he a want? I think, in my opinion, he was more of a want, because the Devils didn't need more scoring, but it did make their top six somewhat stacked. But there's this old phrase, which is too many cooks in the kitchen. Once Tyler Toffoli was dealt to Winnipeg, we saw Dawson Mercer step up his game a little bit. Timo Meier also stepped up his game a little bit, because that freed up more shift time for those respective players. That's my thing, which is don't get greedy. Fix what needs to be fixed, primarily either the goaltending or the defense, whichever is more attainable. Devils have an underrated asset in that projected top 10 draft pick, and I think that can definitely sweeten the deal for a lot of teams, and that can be used as trade capital. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. What do you think the Devils should do with their first round draft pick? And what are your thoughts on potentially using someone that is already established on the roster in a future trade scenario? I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. And what do you think the Devils should do this offseason? What's a need and what's a want in your eyes? Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. Continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys next episode. Thanks for listening once again.